I'm Miles Slattery, project manager for the city of Eureka, and we are at the Eureka Fire Department training classroom. I'm here today to talk to you about low-impact development and low-impact development projects within the city of Eureka limits. Low-impact development is a type of development practice that mimics the site's pre-hydrology. The intent is to make it so that the runoff that comes from the development does not go and get plumbed directly into a storm drainage system and directly into the receiving waters. What that causes is there's no treatment of that runoff, and also it causes an increase of velocity, and then those receiving waters, especially streams, get inundated with water. It causes flooding, it causes erosion, and it affects habitat for fish within our receiving waters. So today we're at the City of Eureka Fire Training Classroom facility, and this is an example of low-impact development. While this particular site here does not necessarily address the runoff issue, as we do have runoff from the site, however, it is adequate for the treatment of the runoff from this facility. We have a type of practice of low-impact development called integrated management practices, where we have incorporated multiple BMPs, or best management practices, within this site to retain and treat runoff from the site. Behind me is an example of one of those BMPs, which is pervious concrete. It allows water that comes off of the pervious concrete to not be plumbed directly in the storm drainage system and infiltrate into the substrate below. As you can see, it's on the front end of the parking stalls here, so that is where typically the drips and stuff and the metals from the brakes and stuff like that end up getting collected on the surface, and when it rains, that runoff will go directly into the substrate and get filtered through that substrate and act as a biofiltration for the runoff. Another BMP that we incorporated into this project were vegetated strips. At the front end of these stalls here, we have not put up any curbs, and the runoff that comes from these stalls ends up entering the vegetated strips behind me. That is a pervious area that allows for the runoff to come in and will allow for that runoff to get filtered into the ground and act as biofiltration, just similar to the pervious concrete. This is another example of an LID BMP we've incorporated into this project. This is what's called an open downspout, and this open downspout collects all the roof runoff, ends up going onto the ground to an open downspout. It goes into this slot drain here and ends up coming into the vegetated area. Conventional development would have taken that open downspout and plumbed it directly into a pipe, and then that would have gone underneath the curb and out into the gutter. So this provides as treatment for roof runoff, as well as detention, so that it'll infiltrate into the ground and not go directly into our storm drain system. This is our final example of a BMP that we incorporated into this LID project. It is what is referred to as a vegetated swale. It's also somewhat like a bioretention swale. We don't have a bioretention swale. Typically is not only for treatment, but also for detention of the runoff. And it's usually composed of 3 different layers: a sandy layer, a compost layer, and then your top surface layer of vegetation. This here, we didn't add the sandy layer, but we do have a compost layer, and then we have the vegetation on top of it. This was implemented and put into this project as a supplement to the treatment of the vegetated strips and the pervious concrete. So the runoff that doesn't go into those areas ends up coming to this low point and getting collected into this vegetated swale here, and it gets treated through the grass and by infiltrating into there, and then ends up, it's only about 30 feet long. And so it's mostly for treatment and not necessarily for detention. However, it does an adequate job as far as treating the runoff from the site and supplementing the other BMPs that we have here for treating the runoff. The City of Eureka also has 6 other LID projects that have been developed within the City of Eureka. There's the 6th Street Villas that has permeable pavement, vegetated strips, vegetated swale, and open downspouts. We also have the Humboldt County Office of Education's new building located on 6th Street within the City of Eureka. It has a very large bioretention swale that has the capacity to handle not only the treatment of the parking lot runoff and the roof runoff, but also detention for the parking lot area and the roof runoff. And that is the only bioretention swale. That is one of the things that we'll be more looking into as far as treatment and runoff detention in the city of Eureka limits. So that's one thing that we'll be pushing forward more often. Another example of LID within the city of Eureka is St. Joseph Hospital's new parking area that has gone along with their new development at St. Joe's. That has pervious concrete, curb cutouts that lead to rocky swales, and open downspouts. Another example of an LID project within the city of Eureka limits is the Alzheimer's Center. The Alzheimer's Center has a type of drivable grass that is filled with gravel on the front end of each of the parking stalls to treat the runoff from the parking stalls. It also has vegetated strips and open downspouts there as well. Another one of our LID projects is the Humboldt Moving and Storage parking area and storage facility for their trucks. It's located on 15th and Albee Street, and there it's surrounded by vegetated strips and has two large, about 150-foot long and 4-foot wide pervious concrete interceptor strips that the runoff is drained into and treated from that parking area. And one of our most recent LID projects has been Pacific Motorsports on Broadway. That has a very large pervious concrete interceptor strip at the low point of the parking lot. It's approximately 250 feet long and 4 feet wide, and also has a large vegetated swale in the front of the development that collects all the excess runoff from the parking area. That swale also has collects the runoff from the open downspouts from the roof. The majority of all these projects within the city of Eureka have not really been sized for detention purposes, but more so for treatment, with the exception of the Humboldt County Office of Education. However, in the future, and definitely in the new reissuance of our permit for our stormwater permit, we will be concentrating more on detention and using appropriately sized BMPs to handle detention of runoff from all of our developments.
Cool. So detention means it doesn't go anywhere.
The idea is, I should get into that too. It's basically, the idea is that right now our general plan has a requirement to detain, your post-development cannot increase the runoff more than 1 cubic foot per second during a 10-year storm. So your model storm is a 10-year storm, and you can't increase the runoff by more than 1 CFS. The new permit term coming out, they're probably going to make it a requirement for Phase 2 cities, which the city of Eureka and all the local municipalities are under. It would require them to detain the 85th percentile of a storm. So basically, you look at historical data, determine the 85th percentile of that, and it would need to detain all of that runoff on site. When I refer to detention, what I'm referring to is most municipalities have a requirement to detain the runoff from the site to a certain standard. Currently, right now, the city of Eureka's general plan has a standard of post-development, no increase of more than 1 cubic foot per second from the site during a 10-year storm. That has been, developers have been held to that standard, and we're meeting that standard with this site here and most of our low-impact development sites. However, with the reissuance of our new stormwater permit, which is coming up in 2011, the preliminary permit has a requirement to detain all of the 85th percentile of a storm event. So we would need to go back and look at historical data, determine how much runoff comes from the 85th percentile of that storm, and make sure that all of the developments within the city of Eureka detain all of that runoff. There's also a caveat that in order to achieve that detention, you would need to implement LID practices. So for the most part, where feasible, you'd have to implement on-site infiltration and detention of the runoff and make sure that you're not having any more, at the 85th percentile storm, you're not having any runoff from that type of storm. There are instances where there's contaminated soils or high groundwater or improper soils. We do have a lot of clays up here, so there's certain sites where you can't get the infiltration and you'll need to use some sort of mechanical method to detain it, whether that's big chambers that are established underground to detain or large oil and water separators that provide detention. that standard still needs to be met with the caveat that LID is the first priority to achieve that detention.
Right?
Good. Okay.
Probably more than enough.